Good morning, church. We're excited. We're continuing on with our series, Stop Pretending and Get Real with Yourself. So we've got two amazing guests this morning. We have Jenna Hesp. You're a local, aren't you? You come back, went away and studied and are now practicing in a law firm, fully qualified. And are you enjoying that? Or?
Yeah, I am enjoying that. So I think I just clicked over 2 years actually. So
Really?
yeah. So it was just like a week ago or something. So
that's so cool.
So, yeah, but I'm enjoying it. It has gone very quickly. So
I would have said 6 months. Okay, and we have John O'Neill from Launceston.
All the way from Lonnie.
All the way from there.
It's a long way.
Yeah, and so what's your role? What do you do?
Yeah, so I work at Tail Race. So
yeah.
the related church to this place, I suppose.
Yeah.
Best mates. So I'm the associate pastor there.
Yeah.
It's good fun.
Yeah. And you're married?
Yeah, I'm married to a lovely wife, Erica. She's a speech pathologist.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot of fun.
Oh, awesome. That's cool. Well,
absolutely. Welcome
along today. We're going to talk about today how to be mature. So it's kind of our, grow up. I don't know if your parents said that to you, but, when you're doing a tantrum or something, just grow up, act mature. But really, if there was one goal of, the Christian life, it's actually to love well. Mm. And if we'd sum it all up, how can we love well? Mm. And that's just not a theory. It's really it's a practice and it's skills that we learn. So we're going to look at the story of the Good Samaritan today and just see what we can draw out of the story. So how about we go to Luke 10 and I'm going to kick us off by so Jesus is responding to this guy who's asking him some questions, and I'm going to kick off in verse 29. And it says, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbour? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead.
Now by chance a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion.
He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense.
Wow.
There we go.
Interesting story. Just as we were reading this, I've actually been to Israel and I've read this story often as a kid. But you kind of think that the journey from Jerusalem to Jericho is just like down the road, but it's actually a really long walk.
20 miles or something, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And it's actually quite a descent as well because you're going closer.
And it was known for like all the robbers along it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was like called the Blood Way or something like this, I think. The Blood Path or something.
So,
Dilla, do you want to go there?
So anyway, I think from this story we can learn some things, how to love well. And for me, there's kind of like 3 threads that I think we'll focus on today. And the first one is, like compassion does have limits and then expectations and then where does conflict end up in our relationships? So maybe we'll just look at the first one about conflict and limits. And so not conflict and limits, compassion and limits. Yeah. You must have limits in your conflict for sure. But compassion, sometimes we just think we've got to be a Mother Teresa and, have no limits, even though she did as well. And so how do you balance compassion and limits, Jenna? How do you see that?
Yeah. Well, I think for me probably the biggest thing is actually getting probably a better understanding of what my limits actually even are. I feel like that's something I'm definitely trying to figure out at the moment. Even this week, I had said yes to things happening in a particular way and then realised that's probably wasn't actually a great time of day to do that for me because it's just not good timing. It means I'm not at my best and I can't give the other person the energy that they need. Things like that. So for me, that's a big one of coming to understand more clearly probably what my limits are.
How do you work out where they are though?
If I do something and then it's I shouldn't have done that.
So experience, you reckon?
Yeah.
Learning.
Retrospect.
Yeah, retrospect. Yeah. So I think that's a big part. So I'm still trying to figure some of that stuff out. But I think for me as well is just realising that work for me takes up a lot of like mental energy and a lot of my energy really. And so it means I can't necessarily always say yes to lots of other things. So I guess being limited in the things that I say yes to, so that when I do say yes to something, I can really, give that
a full yes, 100% yes.
Rather than it then being just a bit half-hearted.
That makes sense.
Do you feel like you got something to add to that?
I think limits is tricky because we have to admit that I can't do everything immediately to everyone.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so I think that's a really important thing. Like I think back to like my wife and I, we moved to Adelaide and we went to a great church whilst we were there. But during that season, I probably didn't understand my own limits very well, and I probably didn't understand boundaries, or I wasn't secure in myself enough to be able to exert boundaries really healthily. And so I sort of ended up doing everything at church. Do you know what I mean? So I'd work Monday to Friday. I'd be away Monday to Friday, I should say, travelling with work. And then I'd come home. I'd see Eric for like 20 minutes. Then I'd be off down the road to church. Do you know what I mean? And then I'd be there till like 1 a.m. packing up Friday night type thing. And then Saturday you might have a couple of hours off and then you got to go do something. And Sunday there's like 3 services. And then, do you know what I mean? So it's just there's this constant sort of thing of, don't you love church enough, or don't you love God enough, or don't you, not that they were explicitly asking that of me, and they weren't trying to manipulate me, it's just my own immaturity meant that I didn't put down good boundaries. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so do you think that's sort of like a filter which you hear the request through?
For me, in my personality type, I think everyone's different.
Yeah.
But for me, I guess that's that self-awareness that you were talking about, Jen. The way I sort of wire and the way that God's created me, I sort of hear it through that. Like, is it not more important? Is this not the end goal? Is this not what we're supposed to be spending our energy on? But there's lots of great things in life to spend energy on.
Yeah.
And
to love well is actually love yourself well, and also those close to you as well. So you can love the church well, but to love Erica and give her, you're a husband, so give her some quality time, not just the leftovers and...
Yeah, that's right. And if I'm not healthy, I don't love well.
Yeah.
And I suppose as a pastor, you'd say that all the time, wouldn't you?
Yep. In myself, but also in others. But that's why I love this story. Here we have this guy who, stops, kneels down, cleans the wounds, shares his donkey, like his Ferrari or whatever, his modern transport, not afraid to put this bleeding man on his donkey. But then he takes him to an inn and actually pays somebody else to do part of the process. So he doesn't do it all.
Yeah.
So,
he doesn't try to be the surgeon. He doesn't try to be the... Do you know what I mean? That's great. Yeah. That's a really good point.
But I know for me, often when I'm not aware of my limits, I'm a bit like the others in this story. I can't see people. I can't see my family. I can't see, I'm in a hurry. And so do you find that happening that... Because in this story, like the Levite and the priest, actually, it's almost they crossed to the other side. They didn't have the capacity to be compassionate.
I don't know if I think it was their busyness that stopped them from seeing. I think it was their prejudice. I think it was their fear. What I mean by that, so my mother and I. So my mum's Sharon. She's the pastor at Tarrace.
Yeah,
and we've been listening to. One of the people we've been listening to lately is Danielle Strickland, who's just amazing. One of the things that she speaks about is how the opposite of love is actually fear. And how when we fear, we're both oppressed. So ourselves, we feel oppressed by others, but then we also in turn oppress others.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in this story of this man, the fact that simply just say man and he's talking to a Jewish crowd means it's probably a Jew. So there's this Jew who's been beaten up, who's been left by the side of the road, and then a priest and a Levite, so someone who works in the temple, comes past. And they would have hated. Do you know what I mean? It was the Samaritan that they would have hated. And so when we oppress others, or when we feel fearful, we start to oppress other people. And so in our own world, what that might look like is that someone might be different to us, or someone might be scary to us, or something like that. So then we don't extend that love. We don't see them any longer. We see our business and we see our hurry, and so we might skirt by on the other side of the road. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's actually love that enables us to see them. It's love that enables us to stop and tend to them. But it's not fear drives all of that out. Does that make sense? I didn't articulate that very well. I sort of had like a little moment in there. But Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think there's different things that stop us, and it's not just one thing, is it? So it can really be. What I'm hearing you saying is that it can really be when we're fearful of what that relationship could look like, or if I give compassion because of who they are, or
if
something.
I feel threatened by them, or if they're just so different that I don't understand them.
Yeah.
Or if they seem scary because they speak a different way or dress a different way. Or
And I think sometimes we think if we're compassionate, we're agreeing with them as well. That probably slips into it as well.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily have to agree with somebody to love somebody and show compassion.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So it kind of gets bunked in the same thing, doesn't it? Yeah. Do you think that we get busy, Jenna, and rush past people, or do you think it's more like the kind of thing that we're fearful of people?
I think I can't think it can be both.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's also like our, I guess like our self-centeredness, or our like lost in our own world kind of thing, that we like stop noticing other people because they're so consumed of what's going on for us. Like if you're going through something difficult or whatever, that you might stop seeing people around you, or like you might fear them, or you might just want to avoid other people, and you might just pop things in the no, that's too hard basket. So then like, I wonder with them like whether it was also part of that they were like just so maybe it was that fear thing, and then they just wanted to avoid them because they didn't want to have to deal with that, or they were just lost in their own world of what they had to do and what they had to achieve for that day, that they just didn't have that time to give to someone else, or just Yeah, I know. Sometimes when I see people who are sad, or in a bad mood, or like an Eeyore, situation, you're just like, oh, I don't know if I got time to like probe and like to be there, because I've got to be somewhere, and I've got this next thing happening, and I'm just very aware, or more aware lately, that I don't have a lot of margin often in my life, and so if you're doing back-to-back appointments and commitments. That means that if somebody comes along, you don't have that 5 or 10 minutes to go, hey, how you doing? Hey, I noticed you're sad. Are you okay? Sort of to ask that question. So interesting to think about.
Very good. So how do you protect that margin?
Well, I think it comes back to scheduling your calendar as well. So, and I mean, I'm a bookworm. I love books, but I really hate books that the writing is to, like there's no, the margins aren't very big, because I like to write all around them. And I often think about that. Like the best books are when there's a big gap at the bottom, gaps on the side, and it's not all too close together. And I know even when you do assignments, you have to write, 1/2 spacing so the marker can write in between. And for me, that's a constant reminder in my life. I need to have gaps. Or like music, it's the pauses that make the music beautiful. And I think that's the moments to be interrupted. So am I interruptible? Probably. That's what I think about.
That's good.
It is a hard one. I feel like it's hard because like the world is very focused on, you have to do things all the time, or like always have to be achieving something to like create that space. So it's like, no, it's okay to do less, so that you can actually be more present for the people that are around you, and be interruptible, and have those moments of being able to help people if they need it, rather than just going, no, don't have time for that.
Yeah. I mean, I was even conscious how I introduced you guys. How did I introduce you? What do you do? You are a lawyer. That's where we went. And I think we just so automatically go to what we do and validate that, and that's where our worth comes from. So I think it's even going back to even thinking how we structure sometimes the way we meet people, because maybe then we'd think differently. So I don't know quite how to do that. I'm working through that, but I'm finding myself being kind of commentating on, what are you doing, Louisa? That's really, you're talking about what people do instead of who they are, and how can you transition your conversations to value people more. So.
That's good.
So we'll jump ahead and think about expectations. In this story, you would expect the priest to do the right thing. You would even expect the Levite, because they were like the people were set apart to do the right thing. But you wouldn't expect the Samaritan to actually extend compassion. So when you look at expectations, how's that worked in your life? Or, what do you hear in this, Jenna?
Sorry, can you clarify?
Oh,
What
like
you're
when you
asking,
think
sorry?
about expectations, do you feel like that you live with expectations
Oh,
on other
yeah.
people or expectations on yourself, or
Yeah.
like how does that roll out in your life?
Yeah. I'd say I have a lot of expectations, and probably often very unrealistic or very high expectations of both other people and myself, which then can create like a lot of challenges. Probably it's most noticeable probably in in my marriage with Dylan, that like if I have all these unrealistic expectations of how I want him to spend his time, or how like I expect us to do things, or what things look like, then it can create a lot of issues. Or I've found that often, and this is something I've been trying to get better at, is that there's always been like a lot of probably unspoken expectations that I have, that I'm getting better at like trying to communicate. But it's not always easy, because you think everyone thinks the same way as you, and they know what's going on in your head, whereas like no, they don't.
Well, that's what I've found really helpful about their EHS course that we've been doing. It actually talks about there's 4 things, not just because I think I've spoken aloud, but they talk about unrealistic expectations, unspoken expectations, one more, unconscious ones, that you're not even aware of them. So you've got this, and then unagreed upon. And even if we've spoken them aloud and, we've told somebody what we're expecting, it doesn't actually mean just because I said it aloud that they've said, yes, I'm going to participate in that. So have you had some experience with that?
I think we all have. One of the things I love about Jesus, and one of the things I love about our Christian faith, is that he invites us to just speak plainly and simply. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just so good. Like, and the more mature we are, I think the plainer and more simple that we speak. Especially in our relationships with one another. We don't try to play those games where there's inferred things that we're trying to say, but we don't quite want to say it. Or there's not that ambiguity, or there's not that passive aggression or anything like that. It's just we're able to articulate where our boundaries are and what our expectations are. I think it's really cool. But it's difficult, I suppose, to live that way. But when we do, it's far more freeing.
Yeah. And I'm just at the moment really challenging my relationship with John, my husband, because often I go, I'm feeling lonely, or you haven't been around, and I would say it in the negative. Yeah. And to actually go, I need you to spend more time with me, or I'm feeling lonely. How could we make some time tonight without you being on your computer all evening? But it's so easy to say an expectation in the negative, and not to actually. For me, it's a lot of work to actually go, no, what do I actually need, and how can I say that in a positive and almost like an invitation? And I think somebody's going to respond to it in the positive much more than when we go, you don't do this, or you haven't spent enough time with me this week. Or, so it's really undoing a lot of language for me to speak it out, but also to realise that.
Even if you hadn't have spoken that out, like lots of people communicate through, that passive aggression, they do something. Do you know what I mean? They light the fire, and then there's the smoke. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's all that drama, all that energy, all that time of just trying to communicate that, oh, hey, John, I'd like to see you a little bit more. Let's hang out some more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the difference in the quality of your life, those two different ways, it's just so drastic.
Yeah.
I want to live more like what you're saying.
Yeah.
And you know what? It paid off this week. Because, he said he had a full day, and he was just driving past because works between Devonport and Burnie, and he just dropped in some flowers and just I just make 5 minutes just to have a coffee with you, show that I remembered you. And so I thought, wow, that's just so much better when we ask for what we need. Doesn't mean you get what you need, but it clears the muddy waters, doesn't it? It makes it simple.
Speaking plain and simple.
Yeah.
Do you yes mean yes, and you no mean no.
Because I remember somebody saying to me many years ago, you're better off to live without expectations, then you're not disappointed. But I'm just like, I don't want to live that way. But I think I could hear what she was saying because sometimes our expectations are internal, and it's actually about voicing them and saying them aloud.
Living that way would just be so devoid of hope
Yeah.
and excitement.
Yep.
So I can understand what you're saying because you don't want to be let down. Yeah. There you go.
But probably in society, we do, live with a lot of hopelessness, don't we? And it's probably, and it probably is related to that expectation people don't want to expect or haven't learned how to clearly articulate their expectations. So,
but I think as well, like when you do speak like plainly and you do like actually communicate things, it saves you like so much. It stops you from being angry or like stops you from like all this emotional turmoil going on inside of you, because otherwise I know for me there's been times where it's like you kind of want, well, it's that passive aggression, like you're wanting to kind of communicate your expectations but you're not going to necessarily talk about it, so you'll just be like really grumpy or like just really like angry and things, where if you just speak plainly about things, like it saves all that drama and you can just have a conversation with it and hopefully then get to an agreed expectation, I guess.
But do you think there's also more satisfaction in it? You don't actually feel like you've manipulated it and that the person's been freely able to give.
Yes.
So it actually is, it's a better experience in the end, or a better outcome, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Because I know when I've done it the other way, it's kind of, you might get what you want, but it comes with a level of guilt, and you're like, well, it's not really the way I wanted to get my way. Well, it's not really my way, but, get what I wanted. So, yeah.
I agree. And I think that's what love is, though, as well, isn't it? Because otherwise we miss out. Do you know what I mean? If there's those unmet expectations, essentially there's something that we're not quite receiving that we wanted to. There's a need that's not yet met. Do you know what I mean? So in some ways we feel oppressed, and so then like what you're talking about, we manipulate. We oppress them sort of thing so that we can get what we want. Yeah. But, God's so cool. He invites us to a different way of life. I just love that.
Yeah.
So love and well is actually that we would speak out those expectations.
Yeah, it's a
and that we would just keep it simple, maybe keep it simple, keep it clear, and actually make sure it's agreed upon. So that we don't set ourselves up for disappointment. Yeah,
it's very good.
Yeah. So a third part of the story is there was some conflict happening in the story. The priest and the Levite, they actually turned away. There's probably a history of conflict there, so just that influenced what happened that day. So how do you see conflict, and is there like, what's conflict look like in your life? Or don't you have any? Are you one of those blessed few?
No, I've got lots of conflict in my life. No, so I think conflict's really healthy, and I think it's something that we need to be able to do really well. I think it's one of the hallmarks of maturity, but I don't think it's easy at all. No. And so I think it's something that comes with practice, and it comes with training, I suppose. Yeah. You know what I mean? It comes with maturity. And I think what we just spoke about, speaking plainly and simply, is a big part of it. But I just think it's so important that we learn to do really, really well. Yeah.
What about you, Jen?
What was the question again?
About conflict, or have you struggled with conflict, or do you find it challenging? Do you embrace it?
Definitely. I'd say I definitely find conflict very challenging to do. I guess it's probably like not something that like I necessarily like grew up like doing. So like it probably wasn't really until like I got married and Dylan had very different views onto how we do conflict, and we deal with things and we chat about things. And it's still at times challenging for me. Like I see the benefits of it. It's so much better because then you get, say there's a conflict, and you get to a point where you reach some form of resolution, or you feel like you both, say Dylan understands me and I understand him, so you get to that level of understanding, and then you can kind of move on, and it feels like it's been like dealt with. But I'd say probably still at this stage it's very much Dylan who has to do all the hard work in making that happen, because I don't know, it's still an area of growth, I guess, for me, but it's definitely worthwhile pushing through, even though it is challenging.
So what about you? What skills do you say it's healthy and to embrace it, Jono? So
I think coming back to a point that you made right back at the start, like when we grow in our awareness of ourselves, when we start to understand ourselves out a little bit more, and when we have a language for understanding others, I think that really helps with our conflict and our ability to do it, because rather than just seeing them as an enemy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like it's far easier to love them if I understand them. It's far easier to understand how they arrived at that decision or why they walked in this way and they're acting like that. Like an example would be, so we've been using the Enneagram a lot lately. Like it's a tool, it's a personality type tool, I suppose. Nothing's perfect, but for me, I found it's given some great language. And so Erica and I did it, and she came out as a type 1, which is like this constant improver type thing. But something that I was always so frustrated with her for, which would lead to so much fighting and conflict, was that she's constantly got this like this attitude or this behaviour of like irritation or frustration that she just walks and strops around in. And I'll be like, what's wrong with you? Like just sort it out. Like just fix it. Like get over it type thing. She's like, nothing's wrong. Stop being so sensitive, Jono. Like, all this sort of stuff. It was only after we sort of had this language around the Enneagram that I could understand that it was just part of her makeup, part of her, like there's just this, often there's this irritation under her skin and she's not even really very self-aware of that. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So once I could come to understand that when she's walking around like that, now I've got a language and I can say, hey, Erica, guess what? And it's just a totally different tone to being able to articulate some of those points of tension in our relationship. And so as I've grown in my own understanding and my understanding of her, I think that's helped a lot.
Yeah, so language is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, language and understanding and
awareness. Sometimes just having the words. I know I'm learning some stuff, John and me, this year, and just saying, that I'm being contemptuous or I'm being critical or I've ignored you, a bid for connection. So just having those things that we've sort of got some language around actually helped keep the conflict as the ball between us instead of, attacking the
personal
person.
attack. Yeah. And I think that language is so critical, especially early on when we're learning how to enter into conflict.
Yeah.
Like for instance, in the workplace, sometimes it can be really tricky because there's a lot of different power dynamics at play or that sort of thing. So at our workforce, like one of the things that we've spoken about in the past is having these linking sentences, because often the hardest part about conflict is the entry point.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's jumping off the diving board into the pool.
Yep.
And so some linking sentences like, hey Dylan, hey Jenna, can I just grab you for a minute because I just need to talk to you about something? Or do you mind if I go that last 10% in our relationship and talk about something at the moment?
Yeah.
Or Louisa, do you mind if I just grab you for 5 minutes and talk to you about something that irritated me today? Do you know what I mean? And then it's getting that buy-in, and it's so much easier to enter into conflict that way, because then you're talking about the issue rather than about the person.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some of that language and some of those tools I think can be really helpful, especially at the start.
Yeah. Well, I've been learning, they call it soft startups.
Yeah.
So, and it's the same thing. And they say the first 3 minutes of a conversation determines the end. Yeah. So, and that's like actually learning some of those that language, how to do that soft startup, how to, just make the person feel like they've got a choice in it to enter in the conversation, and you're not just loading a ton of bricks on them. Yeah,
I think it's worth practicing. So like Eric and I do conflict all the time, so I don't really need to do any practice on that one. No, we've got a great relationship. I'm just doing. But like an example of how we practice it would be at youth group every Friday night. Afterwards, we always have a debrief meeting, and part of that's to train for that self-growth, that giving feedback to one another, receiving a feedback. But sometimes, like, I'll intentionally just mine for conflict, if that makes sense, just to teach people how to react or that sort of thing. And so I'm hoping to train our young leaders in giving them exposure to that. Do you know what I mean? And so I think it's healthy for us to go home or to our workplaces and start to practice some of these things. It's sort of like, I heard this conversation about conflict the other day. I think it'd be healthy if we just practice some entry points into it. Do you know what I mean? So much better than throwing a chair at them to get their attention. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, that sounds really good.
Yeah.
What about you, Jenna? Is there some skills or something that you'd say about conflict?
Yeah, well, I was actually listening to a podcast recently from Andy Stanley on on conflict, and a great thing, like, he kind of like pointed out is the biggest thing that in like conflict and having those conversations that like everyone just wants to be heard and to be understood. And like for me, that's probably actually been like really a helpful thing, because like when I think of myself in those moments of having like working through conflict with Dylan, that's all I want from him at the end of the day, is for for him to just like listen to me and feel heard and understood. Yeah. So I guess for me now going into that, like I'm trying to keep that as my focus point as well, be like, okay, it's really important that I listen and that I really work hard to listen and try and understand where Dylan's coming from or whatever's like happened, that to focus on trying to understand him rather than just like jumping in all the time and trying to cut him off and like say like, no, like you're wrong, or this is what I think, and different things.
That's great.
Like that. So I feel like I feel like I haven't, like that's been a new learning, so I haven't got to practice with that too much. But I think something interesting that I heard as well was that everyone always thinks that everything makes sense to them. Like, so if you do something or if you say something, it makes sense to you, but that doesn't necessarily that it makes sense to someone else. But I guess understanding that, like, say if Dylan does something, that what his actions make sense to him, so he doesn't necessarily see that there's a problem even if I think there is. So it's like to try and, listen to try and get that understanding of what was going on and things like that.
That's so good.
Yeah, something that I've been learning about conflict is that I always used to think one person was right and one person was wrong, but actually allow that both people are right. Because both of your perspectives are right from your point of view.
Yeah.
And so, if you were to describe that mug, you'd probably have a different picture of what's on the table than Jenna, and it's actually just two different perspectives. And I would get a bit argumentative, but, that's not exactly what I said, but it is what the other person heard, because communication is more than the exact words, and to allow the other person to say, this is from my perspective, this is how it is, and that's totally right, because from their perspective, that's their experience.
Yeah.
And I love pictures and metaphors, and I heard it said like this: when you're fighting with somebody, it's like you're two islands and all the water gets murky between yous, but what you need is, like, if you're fighting with Dylan, you actually need to get off your island, go and hop on his island, do a lap and actually see it from his perspective.
Yeah.
And if he's willing to actually get off his island, go on to yours and go, that's what it looks like from your perspective. And so I actually go, I accept really that from your perspective, that's how it is for you, and which is the understanding thing.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's been powerful, because when you want to be right in the conflict, when there's actually two rights, and so that doesn't seem to add up,
That's great. So do you think that our goal shouldn't necessarily to be right in conflict, but rather it's about that reconciliation, I suppose?
Yeah,
it's about finding that common ground rather than asserting my point over you.
Well, if the goal of conflict is to be right, you're going to slaughter someone, I reckon.
Yeah, great point.
But if the goal is to be understood and to understand, I think you can get there.
Wow. So we should always enter into a conflict with seeking to understand first.
Yeah. I think that would change it.
Yeah, and
definitely.
That's coming back to what you were talking about before, isn't it? Yeah, so good. Very true.
Yeah. Very true. So it's been an interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed it. So, we've been thinking about the Good Samaritan, and I mean, really we see that love affected his life. It actually produced something, but he did have limits. And he didn't let conflict stop him from loving, which in some ways he was, he understood the robbers, the guy who was laying on the ground. His need was to have his wounds healed up, it wasn't a need to heal the racial conflict, and he just administered to what the guy needed at that moment. So just in closing, with relationships, how to love well, would you have one sort of tip or, something that you want to just say to our audience today?
Would you like to go first, Jen?
No. I need more time to think.
All right. I think we've all hit on it a few times, and it's that seeking to understand both ourselves and the people that we're interacting and engaging with. And as I think love demands that we try to grow in that. Love demands that I try to see you clearer, and then I try to see you clearer, and then I try to see myself clearer. Because as I do so and as I understand more, I can then be more loving. I can be more compassionate. I know where the limits and the expectations are, rather than I'm just fumbling around in the dark.
Yeah,
I think
so
seeking
good.
to grow is just so huge.
Yeah.
Your turn, Jen.
I don't know really what else to add to that. Like, I feel like that's probably it, like to try and understand yourself better, so you can know what your limits are, so that you do have that room to love people well, and to always seek to like understand other people, and I guess like to not like be judgmental or jump to conclusions as to like someone else or why they might be in a particular situation, but just look at how you can love in that moment, rather than like making up your mind as to what you think is going on for someone else, to actually seek to understand them.
Great wisdom.
What about you?
Great wisdom. I am just continue that love isn't automatic, that love is learnt. And so you've got to keep learning. So it's never that I've arrived, okay, I've actually learned some great stuff today, but tomorrow what else can I learn about loving? And what can I learn about the skills, but what can I learn about the other person, which is the understand thing, and what can I learn about myself? Because it's twofold, isn't it? Because I think if you're only thinking about understanding the other person, you'll miss half of the equation. So
Love's hard.
Yeah, love's hard and fun and rewarding.
But it's part of that too. It's a choice, isn't it? Like it's like that. You have to choose to love. It doesn't just automatically.
No, love
doesn't just automatically happen. You have to make that decision.
Yeah, I love in the Passion Translation how it says in 1 Corinthians 13, love is learnt. And for me, that's just encouragement. And I hope you've been encouraged today and spurred on to learn some skills about loving and loving yourself, loving others, and understanding those in your world, so that you can live with real expectations and hope and enjoy life. We'll see you next time.